Today, we will be talking through the real-world data session on how we are unlocking data and evidence generation. I'm Praveen Haridas. I lead AWS real-world data strategy and application. You'll be hearing from a panel of industry leaders on how AWS is collaborating with partners, real-world evidence specialists, healthcare organizations, and also other partners to unlock access to real-world data and accelerate insight generation. So before I get started, do you mind raising your hand? How many of you know about real-world data, real-world evidence, just to make sure? OK, so we have good. But just to level set, real-world data, what it means is healthcare data captured at the point of care or the status of healthcare patient data, if you will. To keep it simple, I have an Apple Watch. The data collected in my watch is my status. And then when I go to a hospital, while the doctor is giving my care, the data captured in the EMR is another real-world data source. And then the data goes to an insurance plan that is also considered as real-world data. So all these together is considered as real-world data, and real-world evidence is deriving insights from those real-world data sources to execute clinical studies. So today, as many of you know, a use case like this you will all be familiar with. And this is one example of a use case we work with one of our customers. And the use case was, how do we evaluate the effectiveness of beta blocker from real-world data sets? As a researcher, they first need to start with, OK, to do the effectiveness of beta blocker, you need to first find out patients with hypertension, and then patients on beta blockers, and then looking at the lab data set. So as you look into it, and also patients' hospitalization status to look at the safety aspect, there's a lot of data requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, healthcare data is, some of the data sets is in my, in the patient's doctor's office and the EHR data. And then related to the hospitalization event, it's all in the claims data sets. So all these together need to be linked together to give a longitudinal view to do the evidence required for this clinical requirement. So that's the use case we'll be working out today. So today, when a researcher have these questions, this is the typical process that a researcher goes through. So first, they use the literature and other clinical trial data to write the study requirement. And then they look at the internal databases that the researcher has subscribed to. And it's a fairly lengthy process where a bit of them, it's a tribal knowledge. They look into, OK, this is the source A is the right form for this requirement. And then if they can't find the entirety of the data as per this requirement I shared earlier, that's where they look into the external real-world data ecosystem. And this is where some of the anecdotes shared by the customers is it's kind of an RFP and a lot of phone calls to a lot of data producers. OK, I got this claims data sets, but I need it connected to another lab data sets. I need to connect to another source. How do we connect all this together? So many times, they might have 50% of the data, but the other 50% is another source. So oftentimes, they have to depend on data connectors to find out the overlap. And then once they figured out the cohort for doing the study, they go through the contracting process. And then the next part is, each of these data providers keep their data in their own unique custom data format. While on the consumption side, they need it in a different format. And then once the data is cleaned up or harmonized, you have to depend on different type of tools to do the evidence generation. Example, a biostatistician need advanced R Python tools to do the statistical modeling, while a non-technical user want to have a better way to get insights on the data without learning new tool or depending on the biostatistician or advanced data scientist. So all this together takes, on a good day, 4 months. And we have seen some studies taking up to 1 year specifically in oncology and rare diseases because the complexity of the study, if you will. And why it's taking this long. And this is a summary of what we found out as some of the reasons for the challenges. Example, the big one is the fragmentation. The healthcare data, as I mentioned earlier, my data is not in one place. It's in so many different healthcare organizations. The data is very fragmented, and the studies, especially today's studies, are getting more complex. It's similar to the example I shared earlier. So you need to connect these data sets together to get to that fit for purpose for execution of the study. The second part is today, due to all these challenges of data fragmentation and connectivity, it takes like 4 to 12 weeks just to find out the right data source, evaluate them, and there's not a better way for evaluation too. Like, there's a lot of samples being floating around between producers and consumers. There's no way for doing a, like an Amazon.com-like experience for a try before you buy. And then lastly is the harmonization piece, where the data is being subscribed. There's no easy way to harmonize the data from different data producers. It takes an additional time. And then there are no user-centric tools for different types of end users. There are tools for advanced users, but there may not be a similar set of tools for non-technical users without learning those tools or depending on the scientists who have access to the tools. Knowing all these challenges, working with our customers and partners, we come to a point that there should be a better way to address this data liquidity, data discovery challenge, and also the evidence generation or insight generation challenge. And when we started this mission last year, our North Star goal is to enable data discovery, evaluation, and insights generation, ideally in days rather than the months that we are going through today. And our approach to solving is in 2 phases. The first phase, or the first part, is the solving the real-world data discovery and evaluate problem. And that's where our approach is working with the data producers to have their data within their AWS environment. We work with a partner, Datavant, to tokenize their data sets within their AWS environment, and then provide connectivity across the sources through the AWS clean room technology. So the end result is the researcher can mix and match. I want to evaluate data source A and B, and then find the cohort I'm looking for, evaluate them with the data producers have full control on the data, and then the next part is after subscribe, that's where the data harmonization come to play. This is where we're working with several partners, including Aetion, Penalgo, EPAM, Manifold, and others, to enable more of a how do we harmonize the data in a common format. And then they provide tools such as rapid analytics, cohort building, and scientific compute environment tools for advanced users so that they can quickly derive insights on the data sets and then get to the evidence generation. Still going back to our vision of getting the evidence done in 2 days or within days, if you will. For non-technical users is where we are building an agentic solution, and we are working with a life science customer, and we'll get into the details about how non-technical users can get insights on the data sets that subscribe without learning new tools or learning new SQL. So we'll get into those details. Now I'll pass over to Arnab to go through the part 1, which is how we are working on the data discovery challenge. Arnab?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Arnab Chatterjee. I'm the president and general manager of our life sciences and ecosystem and public sector business for Datavant. I'm excited to share more about kind of how we fit into this process and how we think about the dataverse in general. I think this is an age-old problem that we've been trying to solve for some time. So, here we're going to talk a bit about not only, what our platform is doing in partnership with not only AWS, but also with some of our key partners, both across the data ecosystem, as well as key, end user pharma organizations that we work with. But can we really go back and look at this cycle time and say, this was actually better, data discovery got better, the actual ability to query data sets with more nuance got better? And I think that's the pressure test that we should all apply to this model today. So I think Praveen, shared a slide where he talked about this, again, age-old problem around the fragmentation and the silos, and people refer to the 3 V's of data, and I think everyone's seen some version of this. I think if we do take a step back and we look at the fact that there is a massive proliferation of new data sets, new modalities that are being opened up to the world today, that part is genuinely interesting, and we should be incredibly open to what kind of insights can be generated from those data sets. I think in parallel, though, we still suffer from a time to insight problem. We still suffer from really being able to query the data with enough rigor and analysis to say, is this going to answer a specific question? And then there's a really challenging problem to just access that data set, whether it goes through a challenging procurement cycle, or do we actually fully understand, validate the data. There's massive cost associated with this, and then at the end of the day, we're not putting analysis-ready data sets in front of end regulators or payers or whoever the end customer is. So I think we're trying to bridge this problem, and I think doing this all in a privacy-preserving way is just kind of the de facto standard for how we should do this moving forward. So just a very quick primer on what Datavant is. I think in many ways we have sort of a front row seat to how this data universe has evolved. There's over 300 different data companies that are leveraging the Datavant token today. Token is a fancy or not so fancy word, depending on how fluent you are in the space, but it's effectively a way to safely link different data sets in a de-identified and aggregated way, maintaining the privacy. It's a safe encryptor, but we're deeply saturated and situated now well with claims, medical records, imaging data sets, a whole variety of different data partners at this point. Just by kind of where we are right now, we run probably 1.4 trillion data linkages a year, which gives you some sense, that's with a T, how much volume and transaction takes place on just data linkages across ecosystem partners as well as pharma customers. And I think the privacy piece of this is also really important, where we have looked at this from both how do we automate the turnaround of data sets as it relates to expert determinations and remediations, which sometimes have to be done to data sets to make them usable, but also if there's a way to do this at scale and without hindering how that data set maintains its fidelity. I think probably a lesser known fact about how we think about Datavant more publicly is we're actually in 75% of hospital systems in the US. We do the release of information and the retrieval of records to serve purposes like Medicare risk adjustment or for prior authorization or clinical coding. It's a really core part of our business. It's, we're several thousand people. And why this is relevant is because we're on both the hospital side of a firewall in a digital and a physical way. So, we feel blessed and special, in some ways to be able to work with AWS and our data partners, to be able to come up with a solution to this problem. So I think way too much, pomp and circumstance here, but I think in terms of how we think about value and what we want to provide here, I do think linked data is becoming just the norm in terms of how we think about the way data sets get utilized. And these are some client examples as it relates to tokenization, to better target the way we think about patients or developing patient journeys. It can be in relation to building better insights into things like medication adherence. We link clinical trial data to real world data to create long cycles of evidence. So there's a lot here, I think, to unpack. And then if you think about bringing together something like 12 different data sets like we did with Roche for their SMA trial, there's a ton of value derived from the fidelity of having a really well-curated linked data set. So just kind of where we play in the world right now and why this data linkage is so critical. So how does this all come together with what Praveen and team was just showing here? I think if you look at how we currently use our platform today, so you start with, if you're a data consumer, you're going to go into our platform and you'll look at what data sources are out there. You'll roughly look at the 300 different options that are available, and you're going to try to figure out what is germane to your specific research question. You can get some high-level sense of data dictionary and understanding of patient overlaps or whether patients are properly represented within those data sources. And these are high-level filters that you're able to apply. And then there's an evaluation stage, and I think this is where the process is a little bit onerous, where it's not as simple as to say, show me this volume of ICD codes or high-level filters on like the number of data, or sorry, the number of patients you can find in claims data set A and EMR data set B. We do a lot of back and forth email with our data ecosystem partners, and we're asking, do you guys have this data set? Do you have this value? What's the time period represented? So the nuance and the level of custom query here becomes incredibly particular to the research question that you're trying to answer. And I think we can all safely say that back and forth exchange over email is not a very productive or time-preserving way to answer these questions. So this is current state, then it goes into tokenization, linkage, privacy, and then there's an end state data delivery process here. We did integrate our tokenization and data transformation, data linkage engine into AWS last year. What you're going to see now is the maturation of that process and how we're getting to the pain points that I just talked about. So I think if we break this down into like 3 very distinct pain points that Praveen had on a previous slide. So the first one is like this idea of the fact that it still takes 3-4 months to find, subscribe, access RWD, and then bring that into an evidence-ready analysis plan or something that you can submit, whichever end state it goes to. This is a challenging process, and we've talked to a lot of different customers, a lot of different data partners. I think what we've learned is like linkable data has to be what we've all known in this RWD industry for a while, fit for purpose. And I think finding a suitable data set and being able to say, this is actually going to answer my question is something that we still know is difficult. We might end up buying data sets and realize several months down the line that we're not getting an actual answer to the question, and we're paying pretty substantial amounts of money for this. I think the second piece here is around movement. And I think what happens is, data producers want to be able to make these data sets available to an end user. There's a lot of sharing of different copies. We will probably get some subset or sample set of that data, which probably dilutes what the actual value of that data set is. And what that means is we're probably not doing it justice in terms of the discovery process or the value that each ecosystem partner provides here. And then I think the third piece is on the privacy side, it's incredibly difficult to do this in a HIPAA-compliant way, where you're actually signing up for the fact that if you do this much data exchange and exchange of hands, are you still maintaining the privacy and the fidelity of that data set? So again, these are all challenges we face in terms of time, in terms of cost, in terms of how this gets delivered. And this is, again, kind of a repeat of what we're trying to figure out. So how do we tackle this uniquely? The first piece here, which I'll talk about, and we'll actually live it through the lens of one of our partners with Paul, who will walk up here and kind of say, how do these processes meaningfully change? But if you get a better, sharper query going into your actual discovery of the data set, do you get to iteratively query it, ask it challenging questions, be able to say this data set actually does make sense, and does that take does it create some peace of mind that this data set that you're looking to contract with or purchase actually solves the answer to your question? I think the second piece is this idea that you don't have to ship copies of your data over to Datavant or some other company, and you can actually leave it natively within the AWS environment, does actually matter. Because what that means is you'll now have the ability to set up different ways of understanding the structures and the schemas, the metadata. If you're loading it into an S3, you'll be able to have a pointer to that. There's a lot of real upside in being able to say, here's why doing all of this on this side of the firewall makes a lot of sense. And then the third piece here is, doing this through the lens of a clean room, I think, does actually solve for a lot of the problems that we face as an industry, which is this secure transfer, movement, and privacy-compliant infrastructure that we've created. So now, revisiting the process I shared 2 slides ago, what's meaningfully changed here, right? So I think the first piece here is really in the registration of the data sets. And if you're a data producer or you're one of our ecosystem partners, the first thing is that you can actually register your data set with AWS right in the Connect platform for Datavant. And that's a meaningful change because you're actually, in a raw way, putting your data set into the AWS platform. It's staying native on that side of the firewall, as I mentioned. What this also means is that the data source can create a Glue database or a Glue table within that AWS environment. And that has a pointer to the S3 and the table schema, like I just mentioned. This is a live connection. And what that means is if you're making updates to your data set, it will get updated in real time live. And I think that's a really powerful value proposition to just our industry in general, because we do exchange a lot of hands and say the data is refreshed every 3, 6, whatever months. I think the second thing is when a data consumer is looking at different types of data sets, none of that data is now moving between different data environments. And the clean room here is a secure third-party location. It allows you to sort of be the sole source location where you can read and write queries. And then the data sets don't need to manually refresh in the Datavant environment, so the live connection in the clean room will actually reflect the latest data in that S3 bucket. I think the other thing here is that you can look across multiple data sets in real time. And that's a big step up. It used to be that you could only interrogate or query one data set at one time. This will actually allow you to look at 2, 3, multiple data sets. And that, we think, is a big time savings unlock as well. So those are the meaningful, I'd say, step changes in process, in product, and hopefully the entire user experience, which we're excited to have you guys try out. So with that in mind, as I mentioned, I'd love to invite Paul to the stage, and we're going to walk through that aforementioned cardiometabolic example that Praveen referenced. So, hi, Paul.
Paul Petraro from Boehringer Ingelheim. Good to meet everyone. It's great to be here. So I like stories. So we go back 3 years. I'm pitching the value of real-world data to my organization. I'm meeting with someone. I'm telling them how great, if they leverage data, we all love data, it's going to be really valuable to them. And we're talking about some previous use cases. And he says to me, he goes, "This was great. It made me cry." So I'm, "What? Cry?" He goes, "You know what? It was just too late. It was 3 months after I needed this data." At Boehringer, our mantra now is, we say fit for purpose a lot, right? It's right data, right time, right audience. The key is the timing of it, right? We got to get this out. We have to do this in a timely manner. So going back to Praveen's example, how do we do this efficiently? How do we do this quickly? So if we're looking for, don't worry about beta blockers, effectiveness, healthcare resource utilization, integration with our clinical trials, tokenization is a big one, cost-benefit analyses. How do we find that data? Right now, what do? We talk to folks. We get some RFP out. We may ask, someone may give us some insights, or we may hear there's no data, which most of the time probably is not true. So how can we speed that up so that we can look at the universe at large to find the right data to answer our questions?
Great, so let's go through the steps here, kind of how I was laying it out in that circle. But when we talk about centralized data discovery, as you're seeing here, in some ways this is a little bit what we do with Datavant in the platform today. This is data discovery. You can go, if you're Paul, you can come into Datavant Connect. You can look at high-level search criteria, apply different filters. So if it's relevant to the cardiometabolic space, you can look for time periods or specific values via ICD codes. And you can filter at this high level, and I think that will then be a good view of what data sets are available for further evaluation by Paul's team. And some of this is already what we do, as I mentioned, but the big takeaway here is that there is no underlying data movement. So you should have confidence in knowing that these are up-to-date values, that you're filtering at the right level of criteria, just as a starting point. And I'll get more into how this is relevant as you get sharper into your query in a second.
So if you think about it, right? So now we've looked at the universe at large. We're finding the right data. We think there's several data sources. We can link data that we can potentially leverage. Now what? Now becomes the administrative burden. RFPs, going back and forth to answer questions to make sure the data's the right fit for what we need, contracting, and this is all before we even get to initiating that study. And the goal is we want to minimize what I would call risk, right? So we don't want to go through all of this process, start a study, and then a month into the analysis, realize a key variable's missing, or we don't have enough follow-up to complete our study. So how do we reduce that so we can move faster? This helps us get to that stage to move it along much quicker.
So the next piece here is you've identified different data sets within the Datavant Connect platform and the Dataverse. So once Paul and team have narrowed down this short list, they want to run a preset report, and they want to understand which patient cohorts are represented within which data sets. So that entails running what's called a profile report, and you can look on any or all of the different data partners. You can then see fill rates, different demographic information, the medical codes, the geographical representation, and different criteria that are applied here. And then the overlap report tells you, here's what that patient population looks like between two different data sets. And again, I think what this does is it creates confidence in the fact that the data will be updated. You'll know from which data source this is coming from, and this gives you some view of how you might use our platform today. But in Paul's world, I think this is a quicker evaluation of what we've done than previously before.
Yes, exactly. This gets us at looking across data sets. For example, if we're doing a safety study, I want to avoid duplications, right? I want to dedupe my data sets. If I'm linking to clinical trials, I need to know which data sets have the most overlaps, where I can find the right data so that I can move quicker to assess, do I need one data source? Do I need two data sources? Which pieces of information can I get from those to bring forward that right fit for purpose analytic data set to work with?
I think the last piece here, and this is probably the thing that's most different, or probably has come most far along in terms of how the process is different. So in addition to that profile report or some of the overlap reports that you saw, the feasibility process is much more complicated than saying the middle circle of the Venn diagram is like what I need in a data set. So what I mentioned with regards to data providers being able to leverage Glue databases, Glue tables, that actually allows you to write a query in natively stored data, and you get that result back in minutes. You can do this via SQL, but if you're a data science team or somebody working the HEOR side, or you're on the clinical trial side, and you're trying to create a custom request for data sets that are onboarded onto this platform, this churns out a result in minutes, which is very different than that previous process I mentioned of emailing, coming back, here's what we know about the data set, do we actually have fill rates, blah, blah, blah. But I think this is a net new capability that we've put into the process now because of the fact that we've been able to onboard this data directly onto AWS. So the more partners we have within the ecosystem, I think that just makes it a richer experience for Paul and team, and we'll talk about how we can scale this now across different teams in a single individual pharma.
And that's the key, right? We need to find the right data, the right patients, right? As we get more and more into personalized medicine, rarer diseases, you're not going to find a magical data set that has everything. So the broader the ecosystem, the more we can search and find the universe at large, the better it is for us to be able to move these projects forward. And when we think about, if we go back and we talk about fit for purpose, that's going to change rapidly on a dime, right? This week, my needs are going to be very different than 2 weeks from now, than a month from now. So it's less and less likely that I can license one or two data sets and answer every single question I need. I'm going to need to be able to move through this fluidly as quickly as possible so that I can minimize my failures from data missingness and data issues and get these projects and analyses out as quickly as possible. And I think with that, we're bringing Mark Shiraki from Carillon, who's one of those data providers.
Thank you. You want to hold that? Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. We are one of those data providers, and for a long time have been in the industry now as a real-world evidence service provider. Carillon Research, so I'm Mark Shiraki again, president of Carillon Research. We've been an organization that's been in the real-world data, real-world evidence space before it was ever called real-world data and real-world evidence. So we're about 30 years in existence as an organization. You probably know us better as HealthCore, which was our brand for about 26 years. before moving into the Carelon family of organizations within Elevance Health. For those that don't know, Carelon is the health services arm of Elevance Health. So think of it as Optum to United, Carelon is to Elevance Health. Elevance has Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, as well as the WellPoint brand. They're the second largest commercial insurer here in the U.S. So we've been fortunate to work in their data environment and using their data and the data that's available for our research services over that time frame. But one of the things that is interesting being here now that long in the real world evidence arena is that a lot of the challenges that were discussed throughout the day so far have been with us since we started. We've been continually trying to put data assets together to strengthen the data foundation by which we can do our research services. We've just focused heavily on our environment that we worked in because that's, again, what we generated a lot off of. So think about the time that we've been doing this. We've published well over 3,000 publications off of that data environment, and now the intention is to take that and move that out into the data commercialization side to provide that available via the AWS and the Datavant Connect, which we're extremely excited to do. So some of that excitement comes from the fact we can really now apply all that we've learned over the 25 plus years of just working in this data environment, understanding the strengths of that. Everyone knows, all data are not created equal. There's variations in data quality, depth, breadth, governance, use rights on those data, things we've really worked hard through, over that time frame. And it's really taking that knowledge and then applying that to how we create the data sets that we provide out for availability, again, via the AWS Cloud and Connect and Datavant Connect, excuse me. And so, we get asked a lot why we haven't done that previously. And, one of the big reasons for that was we didn't have the solutions like we have today and now we're discussing today to really provide it in a way that we know it'll be, getting the use and looked at from the value it can really bring. And that's a lot of what our responsibility is now as we go forward, because we're not abandoning the service arm of our organization. In fact, we see this as an extension of that. But really, how can we make sure we give the, as Paul mentioned, fit for purpose, or really the types of data sets that are analytic ready that we know our researchers would want to use and provide that out for now the data consumers to use as a data producer. So hopefully you hear the excitement in my voice about doing that. I'm happy to announce we're actually registered as of today. So that is something that will be available. It should be available next week on AWS for use. It's Carelon Real World Data. Lastly, I do want to highlight that we've had a collaborative model since we started the organization, again, a number of years ago. And so we do look to hopefully partner up with folks across the ecosystem to really understand what other data needs are out there to fill some of these evidence gaps we've been trying to fill. And we have access to a lot. As Carelon grows, it goes well beyond Elevance Health now into other entities where we're looking to utilize the data, both on our services side and, of course, on what we can provide out through our data assets. So with that, I will hand it back to Arnav, and thanks again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So just like a moment of reflection, like as somebody who was sitting in Merck and HEOR land maybe 12 years ago, a lot of the pain points that we shared, and I was on the data buying side, is still pervasive today. And as we think about like how do we actually meaningfully change a very cumbersome process where we have a ton of potential and upside with just incredibly rich data out there, I'm without bias, I think, saying like I do think this will actually get us a lot closer to that, reduce the friction of how hard it is to partner with our data ecosystem or how hard it is to get the data that we want on the end user side. So very excited. These are the partners that are part of our platform today. So we're incredibly grateful and thankful to have a different range of different data sets, different modalities, really rich and wonderful partners to work with in terms of how we can get started quickly. And I think if there's any questions, obviously happy to chat further about this. But we're excited to hit the ground running, and I'll turn it over now, and we'll get into some cool AI stuff. So Greg, come on up, or Praveen, come on up.
Thank you, Arnav. Thank you, everyone. That was a great session. It's been a great collaboration with Datavant, our pharma customers, and also Carelon and all the data producers to really go back to the step one vision, which is reduce all the friction and accelerate the real world data discovery and evaluate process. Now we'll get to the evidence generation and insight generation. This is where we'll invite Greg Cunningham from Lilly to talk a little bit more on the challenges with insight generation and how they're collaborating with us. Greg.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm Greg Cunningham. I've spent the last 39 years at Eli Lilly. In my role today, I'm responsible for our RWD platforms. When we look at the problems in this space of generating insights and evidence from real-world data, there is a couple things that are hindering us today that I'll walk through. So I want to spend just a few minutes on that. But I think it's not just only a problem we're having at Lilly. As I talk with others in life science, a similar issue exists of you have more questions that come in than you can get answered. So highlighting the first problem is dependence on analysts. Today we have our end users or scientists need analysts to do the generation of insights and evidence. I'll define insights as an internal question from a brand team, from a scientist that helps describe the patient population or the disease or our medicine or the patient experience. And as we have this work done, the volume of questions, I said, has grown and has not stopped. We've added more resources, and it hasn't helped, to tell you the truth. So thus, the problem is we keep putting more resources on it and can't stay up. So as we do this, the reason is because our analysts and our statisticians, we put on the highest priority, which is external disclosures, like most companies. And then it makes insights that people need to build and support those activities are strained because they're not able to get the information they need either in a timely fashion or those questions just don't get answered. The second problem is kind of the learning curve. When you look at, if any of you have worked with real-world data, you know real-world data is messy, it's nuanced. I worked in clinical for 20 years. Clinical trials are, the data is edited or air-checked as it's collected. It was collected for the purpose of research and clinical evaluation. Real-world data was collected for another purpose. So we're repurposing it, and thus it is not going to be as clean as clinical trial data. So as we deal with these learning curves, new analysts have to learn each data set and the nuances around that. Sometimes they have to learn or use advanced statistical methods to when they analyze the data. All of this really leads to, sometimes it takes 6 months to get a new analyst up to speed. And then if someone leaves, obviously you start the process all over again, getting someone up to speed. The third area I'll highlight is fragmented standards. There are no one standard for format of real-world data, which makes it much harder for people in this space because each new data set you work with is unique. It's usually in a proprietary format. It's got its nuances, like I mentioned earlier, and thus it makes the programming environment for people very, very complex to do the programming and the work needed to generate insights. You sum all of this together, and these three problems really have us understand that real-world data is hard to work with. Demand for information, for answers, is not being met today. So I think clearly we need a new approach. And as we looked at this, we said the approach has to be more real-time, where your end user scientist is able to leverage real-world data and also technology to generate rapid insights so that teams can not have to wait or don't get answers to questions that would better inform and make more data-driven decisions as we work towards those external disclosures. With that, I'll turn the presentation back over to Praveen, who will talk about a solution that really addresses the problems I've highlighted.
Thank you, Greg. So we learned the problem. So the question was how we address this challenge in a scale way. And that's where we decided to collaborate with Lilly to build what we call a virtual real-world evidence analyst. We're internally calling it Real-World Insights Agent. And the way we are building the solution is in phases, where we start with the first phase, which is more of a crawl, find out a small business unit, identify their workflow, most common queries, the data sources, map their queries to the agent. The primary goal for the primary goal of this agent is democratize access to the real world data for all non-technical users, to the users that Greg mentioned. So the goal is to enable all these non-technical users to get quickly insights on the real world data without understanding new tools or understanding the nuances of real world data, and then also figuring out how to run complex SQL queries. And the next part is the tool also should be able to provide simple queries to get the patient cohort from the real world data sources, independent about the data nuances and also on the standards. The other key area is the auditability. So we are working with, as Greg mentioned, epidemiologists. They always doubt the insights coming off the data. So auditability is a paramount important to the solution. So all the interaction between the end user and the agent should be saved and can be audited, can be templatized so that it can be used for similar queries in future. So that's another key requirement for the agent. The other key aspect is on the implementation details. We started this as a simple text to SQL approach, right? Okay, this is, the questions are being asked as a text. We just need to figure out what is a SQL out of it. After, very first sprint, we realized that approach won't work because the goal for the customer here is to build that virtual real-world evidence analyst. So the solution we have to build in such a way that it become in future that virtual real world analyst for the entire enterprise. That's considering that in the goal, the tool should be, or the agent should be able to handle simple tasks like the quick metadata discovery, build cohorts, identify ontologies, understand ontologies. The solution also should have a rich knowledge base. That's another key differentiator in the solution. So we built a knowledge base using reference standard. We also build custom ontologies so that the agent guide the end user to understand the end user's questions and then develop the responses they're looking for, and also build the responses in the way that an end user wants. Like sometimes it could be a narration, it could be a table format, or it could be a graphical. So the agent should be able to build that on the fly based on the end user's requirement. The third one is the human in the loop, or storing the metadata of the interaction. As I mentioned earlier, saving all the interaction and then cataloging those interactions, ability for a data steward to look at those interactions, customize it, use that as a template, and then identify these same templates could be used for other similar queries too. So that's the other aspect that agents should be able to address. So again, how this kind of show how we had to quickly turn the approach of it from a text to SQL to a more of a agentic method. And I'll get to the details on the technical details behind it. So getting into what is behind the agentic solution. So we built, the design pattern that is building all this together is a agentic graph pattern or multi-agent graph pattern, and use Bedrock and several other LLMs that is available through Bedrock, including Claude, Nova. And in a summary, what you would see is there are many agents that do set of work based on the end user query. So to the use case I mentioned earlier, effectiveness of beta blocker. So the first agent will help an end user to understand this question. What does the beta blocker really means? What is the NDC code associated with? That's what the assistant agent does. Then it works with the SQL creator agent to go back to the database ontologies of real world data source to figure out which database table have got the information you're looking for. So this is happening real time, and that information is translated to the medical coder agent, which provide the ontological mapping of the question, as I mentioned, what is, which NDC code map to the beta blocker, and then what is the hypertension means from an ICD standpoint. So all these agents work together to develop the responses and guide the end user to build the responses for the different queries. And finally, the agent also store all the interaction in an S3, which is reproducible, and then that also can be accessible by the agents to access the template. The solution will work in such a way that it can access any data sources, any real-world data sources hosted in any AWS-based environment. It could be on S3, Redshift, Snowflake, Databricks, so there's no dependency on the persistence on where the data is stored and which data source is being leveraged. Also, one more thing, right, regarding the guardrails. The agent is meant to answer some of the questions around, more generic inclusion-exclusion criteria about, what is the average total cost of care of patients with specific diagnosis, what are the intervention pattern for different diseases based on geographic area or genders. What this agent wouldn't do is getting into the statistical evidence generation. Example, what is the statistical relevance about the long-term use of drug and also the safety signals of it. Those kind of statistical relevance, that's where the agent will kind of guide the end user. This is where you should reach out to the more advanced data analyst or use our partner tools to get to that answer. That's where the guardrails and the responsible way of AI comes in, where an agent stops what it's supposed to do and hand over to the next best action by more advanced, either human or tools, if you will. Here's a quick example of the agent demo. It's not playing, but what it does is, here the end user, it's playing it, entering the question here, and then the agent kind of guiding the end user how to classify the beta blocker, and then give the NDC codes. The agent is also now guiding what other questions that could be answered, and then the agent is now providing responses around the hospitalization rate and other details, and provide an overall summary interpretation of the data, because that's how the end user wanted the agent to respond. And then it's asking the next set of questions, what else the agent can provide insights on the data sets, if you will. So this is a snippet of the interaction for the use case that I mentioned earlier about beta blocker. The agent is kind of helping the end user to get to the responses they are looking for. So key takeaways from this. So as you could see, as all our esteemed panel industry leaders told, the relevance of real-world data, especially Paul mentioned, is getting bigger and bigger in our life sciences drug development or pharma value chain. It's leveraged across clinical, commercial, medical affairs. Its usage is just growing. And our goal is to, as I mentioned, really get this to where customers can find out the data, subscribe it, and get insights, not the months, but ideally days. So you heard about the two solutions that we are working with our partners. One is solving the data liquidity. So our hope is with the solution that Datavant, that Arnab pointed out here, the customers can quickly discover the fit-for-purpose codes with full confidence, which is a requirement that Paul mentioned. Get that high-quality data, subscribe it, and then leverage the tools from our partners such as Aetion, Penalgo, Manifold, and others, where they can use the advanced tools to get to the evidence generation report. And for the non-technical users, they can potentially use the agent, real-world insight agent, for getting answers quickly on any data sources without depending upon another analyst, and truly become the real-world insights analyst or virtual analyst, if you will. Lastly, again, we remain committed to partnering with life sciences organizations, healthcare organizations, real-world evidence specialist partners, to get to our North Star goal, a seamless automated process for conducting all studies using real-world data. And our hope is that the streamlined approach will expedite the trial completion, therapeutic area development, leading to a better healthcare outcomes for patients across therapeutic areas. Please reach out to your AWS account team or reach out to me for additional details on how we can collaborate together in your real-world data journey. Thank you again for your time.